picture this. You're standing in a dimly lit ancient stone temple.
Right. The air is just thick with camphor.
Exactly. Thick with camphor. And right in front of you, as your eyes sort of adjust to the flickering oil lamps, is a statue carved from a single massive piece of black granite.
It's an incredible visual.
It really is. Because you quickly realize you're not looking at one deity, but a figure that is split perfectly, surgically down the absolute center.
Just a perfect vertical line.
Yeah. And on the right side, you see the flat, muscular chest of a man. The stone is textured to look like rough ash, and it's draped in the skin of a tiger.
Which is such a specific texture to carve into stone.
Totally. But then on the left side, the carving shifts completely. You see the rounded curve of a woman's breast. The stone is polished to suggest fine silk, heavily adorned with intricate gold jewelry.
Right. It forces your brain to just stop and recalibrate what you're looking at.
It's a total visual paradox.
Right.
A deity that is exactly half man and half woman, locked in a single body. Welcome to today's deep dive, where our mission is to decode this incredible form.
Yeah. We are looking at Ardhanarishvara, which is honestly the ultimate cosmic split screen.
The split screen, yeah, that's such a good way to put it. And for you, the listener, whether you're into mythology, psychology, or, modern gender dynamics, the goal of our deep dive today is to explore what this androgynous form reveals about the duality inside every single one of us.
Because it's not just an ancient artist being provocative, right? We're going to be pulling from a massive stack of sources today.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
Oh, definitely. We're talking ancient Puranas, Upanishads, deep artistic analyses, and even modern academic journals on humanism and law. Because all these sources, they circle back to one central thesis, which is that reality is built on the tension of opposites.
And to understand that tension, the ancient world decided to, literally carve it into a human form.
Exactly. It's a highly sophisticated visual operating system for reality.
Right. So I want to spend some time just looking at this form, decoding the visual before we get into the heavy philosophy. Because the artists who conceptualized Ardhanarishvara, they left absolutely nothing to chance.
Not a single detail. Even the name itself is basically a literal map.
Yeah. Break that down for us.
So Ardha, meaning half, Nari, meaning woman, and Ishvara, meaning Lord.
The Lord, who is half woman.
Exactly. But the contrast they built into this single figure is just staggering. Let's look at the right side first, the masculine side.
Right. The side that is invariably Shiva.
Yes. The right side belongs to Shiva, representing the masculine principle known in the sources as Purusha.
Purusha, okay.
And when you look at the iconography of Shiva's half, you are looking at the ultimate embodiment of the ascetic.
The yogi who has just completely renounced the material world.
Right. And the artists communicate this through these aggressive, raw textures. His hair is carved as a jata, which is a piled-up, tangled mass of matted dreadlocks.
And he's got things woven into it, right?
Yeah, woven into those dreadlocks, you'll see a crescent moon and literally venomous snakes.
Wow.
Plus, his skin is traditionally smeared with cemetery ash. That signifies the ultimate end of all physical things. He wears a rough tiger skin or deer skin and a necklace of human skulls.
A necklace of skulls. It's an incredibly detached, almost terrifying energy.
Yeah.
And the weapons, too.
Oh, the weapons are key.
He's holding a trishula, right? The heavy trident.
Mm-hmm.
Or a parashu, which is a battle axe. Or sometimes is a rosary, but it's made of rough seeds.
Yeah, Rudraksha seeds.
Right. You get the sense, looking at the right side of this statue, that this is being completely unbothered by human trivialities. Even his face is austere. Half of a mustache and that iconic half of a third eye sitting vertically right on the center of his forehead.
And if you only looked at the right side, you'd think, well, the ultimate goal of existence is to just walk away from everything and sit in a graveyard.
Which is why the left side is so vital, right? It pulls that ascetic extreme back from the edge.
Exactly. The left side is Parvati, his consort. She represents the feminine principle known as Prakriti.
Prakriti. So where Shiva's detachment, Parvati is total engagement.
Total engagement. The anatomy softens completely. You have the rounded breast, the curvier hip, the softer shoulder. The hair isn't matted anymore.
Right. It's meticulously combed.
Yeah, topped with this beautiful basket-shaped crown known as a Karanda Mukuta.
The contrast in the details is it's what gets me. Where Shiva has the fierce third eye, Parvati has a half bindi, the elegant dot on the forehead.
Mm-hmm. And instead of snakes and cemetery ash, her neck is weighed down by heavy, intricate gold ornamentation. She's wearing bright, ankle-length silk.
Her hands are holding entirely different objects. She might hold a blue lotus, which is a symbol of fertility and beauty, Or a mirror. Sometimes she even has a parrot perched on her wrist.
Which, if you think about the psychological implication of those objects, it's profound.
Because the ascetic holds an axe to cut worldly ties, while the feminine side holds a mirror to reflect and engage with the beauty of the created world.
Exactly. And the genius of Ardhanarishvara is that it forces you to view these two extremes not as enemies, but as interdependent halves of a whole.
Right.
The spiritual path of detachment is balanced flawlessly by the material path of worldly engagement. It's an ancient way of saying that the spiritual and the physical are both sacred.
It's an incredible visual metaphor. You need both to function. But as I was reading through the iconographic analyses in our source stack, I noticed a detail that seems to contradict this perfect harmony.
Oh, you mean the arms?
Yes, because many of these statues have multiple arms. In the two-arm versions, it's perfectly symmetrical. But in the three-arm versions, this really strange imbalance occurs.
It does, yeah.
Shiva gets two arms on his side and Parvati only gets one. If this whole concept is about absolute, unshakable equality between the masculine and feminine, why does the female side get shortchanged on the anatomy?
It's a brilliant catch, and it really reveals the tension between pure philosophy and the actual human beings who carve the statues.
Right, because the artists have their own biases.
Exactly. The abstract theology preaches perfect equilibrium. But the culture producing the art was still heavily steeped in patriarchal norms.
So it bleeds into the stone.
Yes. In many depictions, the dominant identity of the statue is Shiva. The narrative there is that it is Shiva who has taken the female form into himself. Therefore, Shiva retains the two supernatural divine arms wielding the trident and the axe, while Parvati is given just one earthly arm holding her flower.
Wow.
You'll even see this in the animal mounts carved at the base. Shiva's loyal bull, Nandi, is almost always present. Parvati's mount, the fierce lion, is frequently omitted entirely.
So the pure philosophy of equality gets filtered through the biases of the priests and the sculptors. It's essentially saying, well, we are one perfectly equal being, but I am the slightly more important half.
That's a very human reality creeping into divine art, right?
Yeah.
However, the academic literature points out a fascinating counter-movement. Within Hinduism, there is the Shakti sect.
Right, the goddess worshippers.
Exactly. They elevate the goddess, the Shakti, as the supreme maker of the universe. And in Shaktism, the power dynamic of Ardhanarishvara completely flips.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, they produce these rare, highly subversive depictions where the feminine side takes over the dominant right half of the body.
Wait, really? She gets the right side?
Yes. In their theological texts, it isn't Shiva who graciously splits his body to create a woman. It is the goddess who splits her own infinite form to generate the masculine principle.
I love that. It's literal theological warfare waged through subtle anatomical shifts in the statue.
Exactly.
Depending on which temple you walk into, the right side, the side of dominance and action belongs to whoever that specific sect believes is the ultimate boss of the universe.
Right.
Which makes me wonder about the timeline here. How far back does this visual debate actually go?
Yeah.
When did people figure out how to carve this split-screen concept in stone?
So the physical archaeological evidence points us to the Kushan era.
Which is
That's specifically around the mid-1st century CE. There is a magnificent, highly studied stone stela currently in the Mathura Museum in India. It is widely considered one of the earliest universally recognized images of Ardhanarishvara.
So it's from the 1st century.
Yes. It features the half-male, half-female figure. The male side is making an Abhaya mudra, which is a hand gesture signaling fearlessness and protection, while the female side holds a mirror.
So 2,000 years ago, an artist in Mathura was already rendering this highly complex theological debate into physical stone. But, I mean, a concept this intricate doesn't just appear out of thin air.
No, definitely not.
A sculptor doesn't just wake up one morning and decide to splice a tiger skin-wearing ascetic with a silk-wearing queen. Where is the philosophical blueprint coming from?
The blueprint predates the statues by centuries, perhaps millennia. We find the conceptual origins buried deep in the ancient Vedic literature, which are the foundational oral traditions of India. Long before anyone picked up a chisel, sages were chanting hymns, trying to articulate the nature of the ultimate creator. And they used highly abstract, almost paradoxical language to do it.
Like what?
Well, for example, the sources note that the Vedas referred to the fire god Agni, or the primordial creator Prajapati, as a bull who is also a cow.
A bull who is also a cow.
Right.
That is a massive conceptual leap. It's beautiful in a poetic sense, but practically, how does a person pray to a concept like that? It's so abstract.
It is incredibly abstract, which is exactly why human cultures naturally evolved toward anthropomorphism.
Assigning human traits to the divine.
Exactly. People need something they can visualize. And the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is one of the most revered philosophical texts, gives us the narrative bridge between that abstract bull cow and the physical Ardhanarishvara.
What does it say?
It describes the cosmic entity, the Purusha, which is the universal self. According to the text, this original self was entirely alone. It felt no delight in its isolation.
Because it was the only thing in existence.
Right, so it consciously split its own essence into two distinct halves, male and female. And through the union of these two halves, all biological life in the universe was generated.
I view this evolution almost like technological development. The ancient Vedic chants, the bull who was also a cow, or the soul splitting in two, that's the raw back-end code of a civilization's philosophy.
Oh, I like that analogy.
That's pure data. But human beings are visual creatures. We need a user interface. We can't easily interact with abstract code.
Right.
So by the 1st century CE, the artists in the Kushan era push out a massive UI update.
A UI update, exactly.
They give people a physical interface,
Yeah.
a statue with a mirror on one side and a trident on the other. And then, according to our sources, this design gets perfected later during the Gupta era, between 320 and 600 CE.
Yeah, that's when the iconography became strictly standardized. The Gupta-era artists locked in the exact proportions, the specific crowns, the precise weapons, the flowing drapery. They took the raw philosophical code and turned it into high art. But what I find even more compelling than the Indian timeline is the global context. Because the source data reveals that this specific urge to conceptualize the universe's origin as a merged gender entity, it wasn't isolated to the Indian subcontinent.
Right, the Greek and Phrygian connections. This totally blew my mind when I was reading the prep notes. Because at roughly the same time India is developing Ardhanarishvara, you have other civilizations thousands of miles away doing the exact same thing.
It's fascinating. We see the emergence of Hermaphroditus in Greek mythology, the offspring of Hermes and Aphrodite, whose body famously merged with a water nymph.
Right.
And in the Phrygian culture of Asia Minor, we find Agdistis, a deity born from the earth with both male and female reproductive organs.
Wow.
We even have historical records of cross-pollination. One of the academic papers mentions a Greek author, Damascus, writing around 500 CE about a half-male, half-female deity worshipped in India. Information he likely gathered from an Indian embassy that visited Syria.
So they were talking to each other about it.
Yeah.
That suggests something so profound about human psychology. Across different continents, disconnected civilizations looked at the world, saw that biological life requires a male and a female, and deduced that whatever supreme force created the world must therefore contain both.
It's like a universal logical conclusion.
Yeah, but as we know, logic isn't enough for everyday people. A civilization needs stories. They need drama to explain why this cosmic merger happened. And the myths generated around Ardhanarishvara, they're essentially divine soap operas.
Oh, the mythological narratives are incredibly vivid, and they serve a very specific function. Abstract philosophy is for the scholars, but mythology is for the masses.
Exactly.
The culture needed dramatic, memorable stories to explain the theology of this split-screen deity to everyday worshippers.
I want to dive into my absolute favorite story from the sources. The legend of the stubborn sage, Bringi.
Oh,
This comes from the Tamil traditions, and it is equal parts hilarious and terrifying.
It really is. So Sage Bringi is the archetype of the spiritual fanatic. His devotion to Lord Shiva was absolute, but it was also entirely exclusive.
Meaning what?
Meaning, he took a rigid vow that he would only ever worship Shiva, the masculine principle of pure consciousness. He completely rejected Parvati, the feminine principle of physical nature.
Right.
So, when Bringi visited Mount Kailash, which is the divine abode, he would perform his circumambulation, the ritual of walking in a circle around the deity to show reverence. But he would purposefully walk between Shiva and Parvati.
He would squeeze right between them.
Yes, isolating Shiva and completely ignoring the goddess.
Let's imagine the sheer audacity.
Yeah.
You are in the realm of the supreme beings, and you practically shove the goddess of the universe out of the way so you can do your laps around her husband.
It's incredibly arrogant.
And Parvati's reaction is incredibly telling. She doesn't just yell at him. She issues a curse that strikes right at the heart of his philosophy.
Exactly, because Bringi rejected the feminine principle, which in Hindu philosophy represents prakriti, the physical matter, the flesh, the blood, the tangible reality of the body. Parvati essentially says, Well, if you reject my domain, you cannot have it.
My man.
She strips Bringi of all his flesh and blood. Instantly, this arrogant sage is reduced to a pile of bones, a living, rattling skeleton.
Which creates an immediate practical problem for Bringi. A skeleton has no muscle mass. He literally collapses because he can't support his own weight anymore. He can't stand up to perform his worship.
Right. And this is where Shiva intervenes, out of compassion for his deeply flawed devotee. He grants Bringi a third leg, allowing the skeletal sage to stand up like a tripod.
A three-legged skeleton.
Yes. But Shiva knows this doesn't solve the underlying ignorance. To teach Bringi the ultimate lesson about the nature of reality, Shiva and Parvati physically fuse their bodies together into the form of Ardhanarishvara.
It's the ultimate cosmic checkmate. Now, Bringi wants to walk his reverent circle around Shiva, but Shiva is physically inseparable from Parvati. The sage is forced, against his stubborn will, to worship both the consciousness and the physical reality.
It's a great visual, isn't it? This three-legged skeleton trying to hobble around a half-man, half-woman god.
It really is.
Yeah.
But the psychological metaphor here is what really resonates with me.
What do you see as the core psychological lesson there?
Well, Bringi represents the human tendency to compartmentalize, to isolate the parts of life we prefer while rejecting the parts that are messy.
Right.
Think about how often people try to separate pure, cold logic from messy human emotion. Someone might prize intellect and ambition, the Shiva side of the metaphor, the detached consciousness, while entirely ignoring empathy, vulnerability, and physical well-being, the Parvati side.
That happens all the time.
Yeah. And the myth is warning us. If you try to live as pure intellect and reject your physical, emotional nature, you become a dry, lifeless skeleton. You lose your humanity. You end up needing a crutch, a third leg, just to stand up.
That is a highly precise translation of the ancient myth into modern psychology. It really highlights the danger of internal fragmentation.
Yes.
And the Puranas are full of these allegories addressing different facets of cosmic imbalance. Consider the creation crisis narrative found in the Shiva Purana.
Oh, and this one, Brahma, the creator god who's supposed to be building the universe, hits a massive operational wall. He's creating beings, but they aren't multiplying.
Yeah, the assembly line is stalled.
Because biological reproduction simply isn't working.
Exactly. Brahma's dealing with a purely static universe, so he engages in intense penance, calling upon Shiva for a solution. Shiva manifests before him as Ardhanarishvara, and the visual alone gives Brahma his aha moment.
He sees what's missing.
He realizes his creations lack the dynamic feminine energy necessary for multiplication. Recognizing Brahma's distress, Shiva literally detaches the female half of his body, the Shakti, and allows her to incarnate into the physical world as a woman, the daughter of the patriarch Daksha.
And that's what fixes it.
Yes, this separation of the primal union is what kickstarts sexual reproduction and the proliferation of biological life.
It frames the separation of the sexes not as a tragedy, but as a necessary operational function to keep the universe expanding.
Right, it's functional.
But the sources also give us stories that are far less grand and far more, domestic. The Kalika Purana and various regional traditions describe the creation of Ardhanarishvara, stemming purely from marital jealousy.
Ah, the jealousy tales. They offer a deeply humanizing look at the divine. In one prominent version, Parvati is looking closely at Shiva's chest.
Okay.
The text describes Shiva's ascetic body as being perfectly pure, so clear it is like a polished crystal.
Like a mirror.
Right. Parvati gazes into his chest and sees a reflection of a woman. Failing to recognize her own image, she assumes Shiva is harboring another lover in his heart.
No way.
Yes, and a massive cosmic argument ensues.
She gets furiously jealous of her own reflection? It sounds like the plot of a divine sitcom.
It does, but it resolves with a profound gesture. To absolutely prove his fidelity and to ensure she never doubts her place, Shiva merges his body with hers. They become physically inseparable.
So she knows there's no room for anyone else.
Exactly. And another variation of this jealousy involves the river goddess Ganga. In Hindu mythology, the sacred river Ganga flows through the tangled hair of Shiva to cushion her fall to earth.
Right, he catches the river in his dreadlocks.
Yes. So Parvati, sitting on Shiva's lap, looks up and becomes intensely jealous of Ganga's literal proximity to her husband's head. To pacify Parvati's insecurity, Shiva draws her into his own body.
These supreme deities bickering over who gets to sit where is endlessly entertaining. But every single one of these myths, whether it's fixing an arrogant sage, debugging a stalled creation process, or resolving a lover's quarrel, is ultimately a narrative delivery device.
A Trojan horse.
Exactly. They are Trojan horses designed to sneak a massive, heavy philosophy into the minds of everyday people. So let's really unpack that philosophy now. What is the fundamental worldview that Ardhanarishvara represents?
The philosophical bedrock is the interplay between Purusha and Prakriti, which are concepts foundational to Sankhya philosophy and later adopted heavily by Tantra and Yoga. As we touched on earlier, Shiva is Purusha, the masculine principle.
Right.
But we have to discard modern Western connotations of masculinity when we discuss this. In this ancient framework, Purusha is entirely passive.
Entirely passive?
Yes. It is pure, unadulterated consciousness. It is the observer. It has absolute awareness, but it possesses zero capacity for action. It cannot move. It cannot create.
That is a total inversion of what many listeners might assume. Because in a lot of Western frameworks, the masculine principle is associated with action, conquest, movement, while the feminine is associated with passivity or receptivity. But here, the masculine god is just still. He is the static observer.
Precisely. Because the capacity for action is entirely the domain of the feminine principle, Prakriti. Parvati, or Shakti, is the dynamic kinetic energy of the universe.
She makes things happen.
She is nature, matter, movement, and change. She is the force that actually gets things done. The core philosophical assertion of Ardhanarishvara is that neither of these principles can function in isolation.
It's the electricity analogy. If you want to turn on a machine, you need both a positive and a negative terminal. You can have all the pure, static consciousness in the world, but without the dynamic energy of the feminine, nothing happens. The universe remains a dark, unmoving void.
Shiva without Shakti is a corpse. That is a famous literal translation from tantric texts.
A corpse?
Without her energy, his consciousness is entirely inert. Conversely, Shakti without Shiva is blind, chaotic energy, without direction or awareness. It is a runaway train.
Right. It needs steering.
Yes. The concept of conjunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites, is vividly realized here. Ardhanarishvara demonstrates that the universe is sustained by the continuous, intimate embrace of these two forces. It is the ultimate expression of Advaita, or non-duality.
Let's talk about non-duality, because that's a term that gets thrown around a lot in modern wellness spaces, often without much context. How does a statue that literally divides a body in two represent non-duality?
It's a brilliant paradox. The human mind naturally categorizes the world into binaries to understand it, right? Light and dark, hot and cold, male and female, good and evil.
Sure.
We see the world as a dualistic place. Ardhanarishvara acknowledges this human perception by displaying the ultimate binary, male and female. But by housing them in a single, seamless body, it teaches that at the highest level of cosmic reality, these divisions are an illusion.
So they aren't actually separate.
Right. God, or the ultimate reality, is not male or female. It is the container for both. It is simultaneously fierce and gentle, destructive and creative. It unifies all apparent contradictions into a singular, incomprehensible whole.
And what's fascinating in our source material is how this abstract cosmic physics was mapped directly onto the human body through Kundalini Yoga. They didn't just look up at the stars and say, the universe is balanced. They looked inward and said, my nervous system is balanced exactly the same way.
The yogic traditions internalize this cosmic map completely. In the subtle anatomy of Kundalini Yoga, the human body is traversed by energy channels called nadis.
Nadis, right.
And the two most important channels run alongside the spine. On the left side, you have the Ida Nadi. This channel is considered feminine, associated with lunar energy, cooling, intuition, and emotion.
And the right side?
On the right side, you have the Pingala Nadi. This channel is masculine, associated with solar energy, heat, logic, and physical action.
So every single human being, regardless of their biological sex, is walking around as a microversion of Ardhanarishvara.
Exactly. The goal of yogic practice is to balance the flow of energy between the Ida and Pingala. When these feminine and masculine energies are perfectly equalized, they awaken the central channel, the Sushumna, leading to spiritual enlightenment.
So the physical statue of Ardhanarishvara is essentially a visual instruction manual for internal spiritual alchemy.
Precisely.
It even maps onto how ancient thinkers intuited the functions of the brain, which is astonishing when you think about it. Our academic sources highlight how the left side of the statue, the feminine side, is traditionally associated with the heart, with deep intuition, creativity, and nurturing. While the right side, the masculine side, is associated with the brain, with analytical thought, systematic logic, and structure. It's as if they were prefiguring modern neuroscience's discussions of right brain and left brain hemisphere processing.
Yes, the biological mapping isn't perfectly one-to-one with modern science, of course, but the conceptual intuition that our cognition requires a fusion of analytical structure and creative intuition is spot on.
But there's a contradiction in the mythology that I keep coming back to.
Let's hear it. The contradictions are usually where the deepest insights lie.
We established that Shiva's half is the ultimate ascetic. He wears cemetery ash. He is entirely detached from physical desires.
Right.
But Parvati's half represents the material world, marriage, fertility, and engagement. Our sources explicitly state that this merged form represents the element of kama, which translates to lust or desire, the driving force that leads to biological creation.
Yes.
Isn't it a glaring contradiction to have the god of absolute asceticism, who famously burned the god of lust to ashes with his third eye in another myth, now sharing a body whose very purpose is to celebrate the desire of creation?
It is a massive contradiction, and it is entirely deliberate. This is perhaps the most subversive, liberating aspect of Ardhanarishvara.
How so?
In many religious traditions, there is a strict firewall between the spiritual and the material. If you want to be holy, you must renounce the world, you take a vow of celibacy, you give up your wealth, and you retreat to a monastery or a cave.
Right, the classic spirit versus flesh battle.
Exactly. Worldly life, marriage, sex, commerce is often seen as a distraction or even a sin. Ardhanarishvara shatters that firewall.
By putting them in the same body.
Yes. By housing the detached ash-smeared ascetic and the silk-wearing fertile goddess in the exact same body, the theology is making a radical claim. It argues that you do not have to choose.
Wow.
The path of the householder getting married, experiencing physical intimacy, raising a family, engaging in society is just as sacred, just as divine as the path of the ascetic meditating in a Himalayan cave.
That is incredibly profound.
It validates human desire and material engagement, insisting they can exist in perfect harmony with deep spiritual awareness.
It's an ancient system giving permission to live a full, messy, earthly life without feeling spiritually inadequate. And looking at our sources, this urge to find harmony between opposing forces is not exclusive to India. It seems to be a foundational layer of human thought globally. Let's pivot to the global echoes and how this fits into what the sources call Vedic humanism.
Sure. If we look at Chinese philosophy, we immediately encounter the concept of yin and yang. In Japanese philosophy, the equivalent is yin-yo.
Right, we've all seen the symbol.
And these systems are built on the exact same premise of polar energies. Yin is the dark, passive, feminine element. Yang is the light, active, masculine element. And crucially, just like Shiva and Parvati, yin and yang are not locked in a battle of good versus evil.
They need each other.
They are fundamentally complementary. The universe breathes through their continuous interaction.
What fascinates me is the difference in execution. The Chinese philosophy codified this idea in a brilliantly abstract geometric symbol, the famous circle with the black and white swirls chasing each other, each containing a small seed of its opposite.
It's elegant, but it's impersonal.
Exactly. But the Indian philosophers took the exact same cosmic physics and made it viscerally intimate. They grafted the physics of the universe onto a human torso. They gave it eyelashes, jewelry, weapons, and a heartbeat.
And we find echoes of this original unity in Western theology as well. One of the academic papers in our source stack analyzes the Book of Genesis.
Oh, the Adam and Eve story.
Yes. It points out that the creation of Eve from Adam's rib implies an initial primordial state where male and female were unified within a single cosmological body before being separated.
Before the split.
Right. The implicit narrative in many of these global myths is that human beings are driven by a subconscious desire to return to that initial state of unified wholeness.
It's a universal human operating system. But that raises a major question. One of the academic journals we reviewed explicitly labels the Hindu version, Ardhanarishvara, as a humanistic construct.
Yes, that's a key distinction.
If the concept of male-female unity is found globally, from Greece to China to the Middle East, why is this specific Indian iteration singled out as uniquely humanistic?
It comes down to how we define humanism. When we talk about Western humanism, which traces its roots back to classical Greek philosophy and the Renaissance, the focus is heavily anthropocentric.
Meaning focused on humans.
Yes. It centers on human rationality, science, and the agency of the individual. Often it defines human progress in opposition to or completely separate from nature and the divine. Man is the measure of all things, standing apart from the universe.
A very humans conquering the natural world vibe.
Exactly. But Vedic humanism, which produced Ardhanarishvara, operates on integration rather than separation. It does not place man in opposition to nature or God.
So we aren't separate from it.
No, instead, it posits that human consciousness is a direct, inseparable microcosm of the divine universe. Ardhanarishvara is a humanistic construct because it takes the loftiest, most inaccessible cosmic truths, like the unification of energy and matter, and brings them directly into the human living room.
I see.
It applies high theology to the mundane realities of domestic life, marital conflict, and physical intimacy. It elevates the human experience to the level of the divine.
It says that your daily struggle to balance your logic and your emotion isn't just a psychological quirk. It is a reflection of the universe trying to balance itself. Which brings us perfectly to the modern relevance of this ancient stone. How does a 2,000-year-old split-screen deity actually impact the real world today, specifically regarding gender, biology, and daily life?
Well, the biological parallels highlighted in the modern academic sources are remarkably prescient. One paper we reviewed points out that, from a strictly biological and physiological standpoint, human beings are not purely unisexual organisms in an absolute binary sense.
Right. Regardless of biological sex, every human body produces both estrogen and testosterone. We all carry the genetic legacy, the chromosomes of both a mother and a father.
We are all biological composites. The ancient texts, operating without microscopes or endocrinology, intuited that the universe requires the unity of biological opposites to sustain itself, and that every individual contains the potentiality of both.
So they're way ahead of their time.
Definitely. Ardhanarishvara was visually representing a spectrum of biological and psychological fluidity that modern science is only now mapping in detail with neurohormonal mechanisms.
But this brings us to a really difficult, tragic irony that our sources do not shy away from.
The social reality.
Yeah. We're looking at an ancient Indian culture that placed a non-binary, gender-fluid, half-man, half-woman deity at the absolute pinnacle of cosmic importance. They literally carved gender fluidity into sacred stone. Yet, if we look at modern society in the region, there is a deep systemic struggle with rigid patriarchy and the intense marginalization of third-gender people.
It is a profound and painful cognitive dissonance within the culture. The historical reverence for the fluidity of Ardhanarishvara stands in a sharp, disturbing contrast to the lived realities of third-gender and transgender communities in India today, communities such as the Hijras, Kinnaras, and Uravanis. These communities have a rich, complex historical and cultural legacy, often directly linked in mythology to these ancient concepts of divine fluidity. Yet, in modern times, they face severe social exclusion, discrimination, violence, and economic marginalization.
I was reading through the legal history in the sources, specifically the landmark 2014 NLSA judgment by the Supreme Court of India. The court legally recognized transgender individuals, granting them fundamental rights and recognizing a third gender.
A huge legal step.
Right. And what's fascinating is that the court actually referenced ancient mythological figures, acknowledging this deep historical precedence for gender fluidity. But the academic paper points out that a legal victory hasn't erased the social reality. Massive barriers remain in employment, healthcare, and basic social acceptance.
This is where the academic source brings in philosopher Judith Butler's theory of gender performativity.
Right, Butler's work.
Butler argues that gender isn't just an innate fixed identity, but a series of acts and performances constituted by rigid social norms. The tragedy of Ardhanarishvara in the modern context is that the myth explicitly subverts patriarchal norms. It visually proves that neither the masculine pole nor the feminine pole is superior. They share the exact same body in perfect equality.
But people aren't living that reality.
No. The society that worships this deity often fails to translate that theological inclusivity into sociological inclusivity.
It's like the deity has been waving a massive flag for gender equality and the dismantling of rigid binaries for 2 millennia, shouting, "You need both sides, neither is better." But society just looks at the statue, prays to it, and then completely ignores the memo when they walk out of the temple. The gap between divine ideal and human practice is vast.
Very vast.
So for you, the listener, trying to bridge that gap in your own life, how do you use this concept practically? It's not just about looking at art. Our sources suggest it's an active practice.
Yes. The primary practice highlighted in our text revolves around the Ardhanarishvara stotram.
A stotram being a hymn.
Exactly. This is an incredibly famous, potent hymn composed by the 8th century philosopher Adi Shankaracharya. It is a masterpiece of Sanskrit poetry that systematically contrasts the two halves of the deity.
What does it sound like?
Well, it praises the camphor-colored body of Shiva alongside the jasmine-colored body of Parvati, the matted locks next to the intricate curls, the skull garland beside the gold necklaces.
But chanting a poem about a statue's jewelry isn't going to change your life. What is the psychological mechanism at play when someone engages deeply with this stotram?
The physical descriptions are just anchors for the mind. According to the traditions and psychological interpretations, chanting this stotram or deeply meditating on the imagery is an exercise in profound psychological integration.
How does that work?
It forces the practitioner to hold two opposing concepts in their mind simultaneously without rejecting either. By daily acknowledging the divine masculine and the divine feminine within the same space, it helps the individual balance their own internal energies.
Okay, so it's a mental exercise.
Yes, it is said to cultivate emotional maturity, erode the rigid boundaries of the ego, calm internal psychological turmoil, and foster a deep sense of empathy.
It's essentially a daily recalibration.
Mhm.
It reminds you that your internal logic and your internal emotions are not enemies fighting for control of your brain. They are meant to function as a single, unified team.
It demands that we stop compartmentalizing ourselves.
I love that. So I want to pose a question directly to you, the listener. Take a moment to honestly reflect on your own internal biases. Which side of yourself do you naturally favor, and which side do you suppress?
It's a tough question to answer, honestly.
It is. Do you lean so heavily into logic, action, and ruthless ambition, the masculine right brain side of this metaphor, that you end up like the sage Bringy? Are you a spiritual skeleton trying to balance on a third leg because you've entirely starved your emotional, nurturing, empathetic side?
Or the opposite.
Right. Or do you swing so far the other way, living entirely in pure emotion and fluidity, that you lack the structural logic to actually stand up and move forward? How do you balance your own internal Shiva and Parvati?
That introspection is the ultimate humanistic application of Ardhanarishvara. The deity isn't just an object of worship. It is a mirror reflecting our own divided selves, challenging us to become whole.
Let's pull back and recap the incredible territory we've covered today. We started in a dimly lit temple, confronting a literal split-screen statue carved from black stone 2,000 years ago during the Kushan era.
We decoded the intricate visual language of the ascetic and the householder.
Yeah, and we traced that imagery back to the abstract, open-source philosophy of the ancient Vedic chants.
We navigated the wild, dramatic mythology that was built around it, from curses that dissolve flesh and bone, to cosmic domestic disputes over reflections in crystal chests, to Brahma's desperate attempts to restart biological creation.
And we dug deep into the profound psychological and biological truths pulsing underneath those stories. We saw how this half-man, half-woman deity serves as a complex roadmap for balancing pure consciousness with dynamic action.
And we confronted the difficult modern realities.
We did, looking at how this ancient stone holds up a very uncomfortable mirror to our contemporary struggles with gender equality, performativity, and social justice. It is infinitely more than just an old piece of art.
It is a resilient, enduring framework for understanding what it actually takes to be a complete human being navigating a highly complex, dualistic universe.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, building on a subtle tension buried in the philosophy we've discussed today.
Okay, what is it?
We've spent this entire time exploring how Ardhanarishvara represents the necessary, beautiful tension of opposites that is absolutely required to sustain the physical universe. Creation needs this duality, this push and pull of Shiva and Shakti to exist.
Which the core of it, yes.
But if you look at the broader scope of Hindu philosophy, the ultimate goal of the soul is moksha.
Liberation. Escaping the endless cycle of rebirth and breaking free from the physical universe entirely.
Exactly. The goal is to transcend the physical. So if the goal is to escape the universe, perhaps Ardhanarishvara isn't just a symbol of creation. Perhaps it is also a symbol of ultimate dissolution.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. When you perfectly merge two absolute opposites, when the pure static consciousness fully integrates with the pure dynamic energy, when the masculine and the feminine collapse into absolute equilibrium, well, maybe they don't just sustain the world.
Like matter and antimatter.
Yes, like matter-antimatter finally meeting, perhaps the ultimate merging of these two halves is meant to eventually cancel each other out. Perhaps the true purpose of finding this perfect inner balance is to collapse the illusion of duality entirely, returning the soul to a state of absolute, genderless, formless, breathtaking silence.
That is a stunning thought to end on.
Something for you to think about until our next deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of the sources. We wish you a beautifully balanced and harmonious day.